Hello guys, welcome to the 23rd episode of Lumion 10 tutorial. In this episode, we will talk about effects that we have in camera section. First effect that we have here is photo matching. So pay attention. Let's get an angle from this render, for example this part. We take our shot and in photo matching, we have the possibility to mix our building on an image. So I'm gonna load a picture here, a simple background. For example, this one. Let's use transparency, but before doing that, let's choose our reference and select where the building is. Let's place it separately from the building because I want to have the front area as well. Let's make it bigger or smaller, and with transparency we can use where and how we want to do it. And with this 4 dots that we have here, we can change the angle of our building inside this environment. We can use this for the building, and in the end we can move every single object in order to get the correct positioning. Let's place our reference closer to the building so we can have a better control on the building. And as you can see, with these dots, you can control your environment. Let me increase the scale a little bit so we can get closer to the building. And in here we can do our edits to find the correct angle that we want. So we get the angle that we want, and slowly we can make it smaller by the scale. Let's move that a little bit. As you can see, the mountain is behind that area. And when we get our correct angle, we move to adding next effects. Let's place it here. I think that's relatively okay. Like that. And as you can see, the angle is relatively okay and we have a good view. We press OK, and now after this, we can add other effects to the environment to determine that we want to have reflection here and other stuff, and create a good mixture with this effect that we have here to show you our project correctly. So pay attention, we have a mountainous background now. So very easy, we've just mixed the picture that we wanted with our design here. We could even change the angle to create something different. Bring it down a bit, like that. Or change the angle of the perspective so we can see more of the mountain. So with this technique we can very easy, before we import this file into Photoshop or any other program, we can mix it with another image. And in camera we have handheld camera. And in handheld camera, as we've talked about it before in animation, we had shake in movement. So it's like that a person is holding the camera and it's moving. And film edge is make the edges like the old camera effect. With this we can change the amount of gradient. And with this gradient we can add a little saturation in the middle. With tilt you can tilt your camera, and with focal length you can zoom in or zoom out. And as you remember in previous episode, we could create some keyframe and specific effects from this effect. The next effect that we have here is exposure. With this one you can increase the light or decrease the light in your environment. We go to this render, and let's do that in this environment. Let me move the reference a little bit to place it there. Reduce the scale a little bit. A simple movement. So with photo matching we've mixed them together, and let's create a realistic in order to have a brighter area. Let's use real sky to change the angle of the sky so we have shadows and light enough on our building. Let's go on exposure to see how much light we can add to our environment or how much light we can take from our environment. So with this effect we can control how much light we want to have inside our environment. And be sure that this will affect on the quality of your render a lot, if you do it correctly. The next effect that we have here is 2-point perspective, which we worked on in previous episodes. you will see the most of this effect when you enter 3-point perspective, and it will take the 3-point perspective from your design. And in motion blur, you can use that in your animation. It's like when you're moving, if you have, for example, a car or a camera inside your environment. So pay attention. I'm moving from here, second shot, third shot, fourth, and with a lot of speed, we're passing through this environment. The reason that I'm doing a lot of shots is because I want to reduce the duration of them. Let's play, and we are moving like that. And if you reduce the second, we want to change it to 10 seconds. The speed is really high now. The thing will happen if we go in motion blur, and as you can see, when we are moving the trees and our environment, we get a little blurred. And the amount of blurriness, you can change it inside here. And it will create a very specific effect for you. So let's go inside effects now again. And let's check depth of field. And this effect, if you remember, we've worked on it previously on previous episode a lot. And we can place our angle here to show some plants and vegetation, and with depth of field we can select if we want to blur foreground or background, or we can choose it as we like. And with focus distance, it can determine the depth of our field of depth. And in sharpness, you can increase the sharpness, and if you want to edit it, you can select your object by hand, and if you activate autofocus, it will happen automatically. And with very simple effect, we've made it like that. Let's reduce focus distance and do it like this. And as you can see, you can change the effect from these bottom options. And as you can see, as we've changed the focus distance and put it on a building, the rest of the area will be blurred. If you change the angle of the sun, instead of putting it on the building and the rest of the area, here the amount of light that you will have inside your camera will be more. The stop-like lights. And we have a different render, just like that. You can reduce depth of field and create a render like that. So the next thing is lens flare, and lens flare is for the area that we have light. And pay attention to the sun. You can add to the brightness and the light rays that our light source is creating. Bloom and the distance of these flares. You can check each one of them and the brightness of the bright source of our light source. The amount of flares that you can have here, you can rotate it. You can change the density. And if you added anamorphic, you can add a blue light. So as if you remember, it could be sun or any light source. And with hollow mount, you can add a little light on every part of your render. And dirt, you can add a little dirt on your camera lens. And if we at the same time add a reflection effect on our glass, we can create something wonderful from this. So we have our environment like that with a very good reflection. We can create something like that. And at the same time, if we use exposure, we can increase the light in our foreground. So very easy with just simple tricks and simple effects, we created something wonderful from this. And be careful with the amount of hollow that you have in your lens flare to not create something super intense. Like that. So let's move to the next effect that we have here. Is a chromatic aberration effect. And with this effect you can add a little distortion around your render. And you can use that to some degree in your anterior renders in order to create something more natural. Let me remove this first and choose realistic. And in interior or exterior, usually it will put it automatically in your design as well. It's not like that you won't have it. Some areas you should have it, but we usually put this for our render. Now look at the edges when you use this effect. And just experiment it and see how you can use it. Let's go back to camera again. And here we have fisheye lens effect, which some sort of we are all familiar with. And another interesting effect that we usually use a lot is tilt shift, which you can reduce or increase the amount of it. And you can blur the top of your image or the bottom of your image and the amount of it, and the amount of sharpness. And it can create a very wonderful outcome for you. So with a very simple technique, we just create a new outcome. And as you can see, the result is very pleasant and acceptable. We just need to use camera raw filter and edit this render inside Photoshop later on to make it even better. And there is one thing that is worth mentioning is that I usually use tilt shift for this type of angle more. For example, I want to capture an angle like this, and when we add tilt and shift, it will create a very wonderful effect. And you can focus on the area that your building is placed at, and you can blur everything around it. And you can change the amount of blurriness and the rest. When you use this type of effect, if you pay attention, your design will look like a replica. and it will not look as realistic as before. So we've talked about all of the effects in camera, trying to use them and experience them in your projects and get different results with each one of them. Share your projects with me and be well.